The morning sky hung low, blanketed with heavy gray clouds. And the city was slowly sinking beneath a relentless curtain of rain. In front of a grand mansion surrounded by manicured hedges and marble fountains, a woman in a worn blue uniform sat beneath a tree. Her damp hair clung to her face, her trembling hands holding a cheap plastic lunchbox. The downpour intensified, mingling with her silent tears. Yet, she didn't move, didn't seek shelter. Her food was getting drenched, her clothes soaked through, and her frail frame shivered from the cold and exhaustion. She looked like someone who had long forgotten what comfort felt like. That's when he noticed her. The man who owned the mansion. A man whose wealth could buy comfort for thousands. But what he discovered next would break his heart more deeply than any loss of fortune ever could. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your single gesture can help spread warmth and hope across the world. The man's name was Richard Hale, one of the city's wealthiest businessmen. He had built his empire from nothing. But in doing so, his success had hardened him. He believed money could buy everything. Respect, power, even happiness. To him, the people who worked for him, maids, drivers, gardeners, were simply part of the background of his prosperous life. But that morning, something about his maid sitting alone in the rain pierced through the wall he had built around his heart. Her name was Maria. Quiet, dutiful, and always early. He had never once seen her complain or ask for anything. Yet now, she sat in the pouring rain, eating as though the world had forgotten her. Richard watched her for a while from his car, puzzled. Why would anyone choose to sit out there in such miserable weather when shelter was just a few steps away? Inside, the kitchen was warm and spacious. Finally, he stepped out. His polished shoes sank into the wet grass as he called out to her. But Maria didn't respond. Perhaps she didn't hear him, or maybe she simply didn't want to. When he approached, she scrambled to her feet, quickly wiping her face and trying to hide her food, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. The sight of her shaking hands unsettled him. He asked gently why she was sitting there, but she only murmured an apology, eyes downcast. Richard said nothing more and walked away. But something inside him refused to let the image go. The rest of the day, he couldn't focus. His meetings, his luxury calls, even the ticking of his expensive watch, all faded into the background of his thoughts. All he could see was that woman in the rain. That evening, during dinner, he quietly asked one of his senior staff members about Maria. The man hesitated before saying softly, "Sir, she prefers to eat outside. She says she doesn't want to disturb anyone." The explanation didn't sit right with Richard. So, the next day, just before lunch, he decided to follow her. Quietly, from a distance. Maria carried a small lunchbox wrapped in a plastic bag and walked to the same tree in the garden. The sky was clearer now, though the air still smelled faintly of rain. She sat in the exact same spot, as if that lonely patch of grass was her only refuge. When she opened her meal, he noticed it wasn't much. Some rice and beans, perhaps leftovers. Her hands were rough, her wrists thin. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were precious. After a few minutes, Richard approached. This time not as an employer, but simply as a man with questions. "Maria," he said softly, "why don't you eat inside? The staff room is warm, and the rain is gone." As she froze mid-bite, then set her spoon down. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "Sir, I used to. But one day, your guests arrived early. I was sitting in the corner when they said my uniform smelled like detergent, and that I shouldn't be near the dining area. I didn't want to embarrass you again, so since then, I eat here." Her words struck him like a blade. Richard stood silent. He couldn't recall that day, but the thought that someone had been humiliated under his roof filled him with shame. Then she smiled. A small, tired smile meant to ease his discomfort. And that smile broke something inside him. Over the next few days, Richard quietly observed her. He discovered that she arrived 2 hours early every morning. Not because she had to, but because she walked a long distance from a small rented room on the city's edge. Her husband had died years ago, in an accident, leaving her to raise a young son alone. She worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving at his mansion during the day. Despite her exhaustion, she was always kind, always gentle. When he realized she had been enduring pain and hunger, just to keep her son in school, guilt washed over him like the same rain she once sat through. One afternoon, Richard decided to visit her neighborhood. It was far from the glitter of his world. The streets were narrow, the homes worn and cracked. Barefoot children played in puddles. Inside one of those small homes, he saw a boy sitting at a wooden table, studying under a dim bulb. The boy looked up and smiled politely. Behind him, drawings hung on the wall. A doctor, a hospital, and a woman in a blue uniform. Richard realized the boy's dream was to become a doctor, to help people like his mother. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stared out at the city lights and thought of how he had built skyscrapers, but never kindness. He had millions in his account, yet nothing of true worth in his heart. The next morning, he called Maria into his office. She entered nervously, fearing she had done something wrong. But instead of reprimand, Richard handed her an envelope. Inside was a scholarship for her son, fully funded until graduation, and a promotion letter offering her the position of housekeeping manager, with a higher salary. Her hands shook as she read the words, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she whispered. Richard smiled softly. "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "Just promise me you'll never eat in the rain again." A week passed, and the mansion felt different. The air seemed warmer. The staff smiled more. Even Richard's family noticed his change. He spent more time talking to his employees, learning their names, their struggles, their dreams. He realized something profound. Success without empathy is just emptiness in disguise. And every time he passed that old tree in his garden, he remembered the day his heart woke up beneath the rain. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that remind the world what it truly means to be human. Before we end, tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from Maria's story? Was it kindness, humility, or empathy? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Years later, Maria's son graduated with honors, finally becoming a doctor. On that proud day, Richard sat in the audience, clapping the loudest. When Maria turned to thank him, he smiled and said, "You gave me far more than I ever gave you. You reminded me what wealth truly means. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One act of kindness, one moment of understanding, one look beneath the rain, to change a heart forever."